Thank you so much, Jessica. This latest round of talks moves Havana and Washington one step closer to normalizing ties, but pitfalls remain to ending the 54-year strain. Joining me now is Peter Kornbluh, the director of the Cuba Documentation Project with the National Security Archives. Welcome and thank you. Let me just ask you, Roberta Jacobson in her news conference said there is cooperative spirit, but they won't have big headlines. In other words, lots of little sticky details to work out. If you were looking for a headline, what's your takeaway?
Well, that the two sides are both committed towards moving this process forward, and that they're going to have talks in the near future, that the plan for President Obama to meet Raul Castro at the Summit of the Americas in April is still operative, and that at some point, presumably soon, the U.S. interest section in Havana will become the U.S. Embassy in Havana, and the Cuban interest section in Washington will become the Cuban embassy in Washington.
But the differences between the two sides are pretty evident, even when you're just watching these news conferences. For example, Josefina Vidal indicating that they were making headway in the removal of the state-sponsored terrorist designation. Jacobson kind of like, wait a minute, just hold on just a second, backing away from that. A more cautious tone in her comments about the same issue. Are they just on different pages?
No, I think they're on the same page, but Assistant Secretary Jacobson has to deal with the issue that there are rabid right-wing opponents in the U.S. Congress of taking Cuba off the list. Those opponents don't necessarily hold veto power over the president's decision to do this, but they can create huge obstacles for it to be successfully done. The president, I believe, will announce before he goes to the summit of the Americas in Panama in April that his administration is finally taking Cuba off a list of state sponsors of terrorism that they don't belong on, and finally doing the right thing. There's no logic to normalizing diplomatic relations with a country that we truly believe is sponsoring terrorism. But the president will announce this and notify officially Congress, and Congress will then kind of play with this issue for 45 days. It'll become a political football for the Chris Christies and the Robert Menendezes and the Ileana Ros-Latinens of the world in the U.S. Congress and on the campaign trail in the case of Governor Christie. And there may be a move from the Republicans to actually, pass a resolution to continue to sanction Cuba until these fugitives are sent home, et cetera. But the president, I believe, is absolutely committed to taking Cuba off the list, and that will happen very soon.
Banking also a major issue, and it seemed like both sides recognized that during their news conferences.
I mean, the banking issue is clearly tied to being on that list and the kind of fear that is struck in the international banking institutions and international banks about dealing with a country that is still on the list. And I really do think that this will open up completely once Cuba is removed from the list. I mean, this is a conundrum and a problem of the Obama administration's own making. They might have taken Cuba off the list some time ago, not tied to this very issue, to improve the kind of tone of U.S.-Cuban relations. Cuba doesn't belong on the list. They shouldn't have been on the list for all these years. But now we have a situation where being on the list has created this banking quagmire, and you can't really have normal relations when the Cuban interest section can't even process visas for people to travel to Cuba. So it's a real problem.
Let me ask you one final question. We've talked about those two issues. What are some of the other issues that you see maybe as sticking points for each side?
The United States wants their embassy officers to have free range to go all over Cuba. Cuba is still, after 50 years of U.S. aggression, mistrustful that will be for benign reasons. They believe that U.S. officials will be meeting with dissidents and trying to kind of push them to oppose the regime. So they're worried about that. The kind of whole framework of having better relations is going to have to. It's going to take time and patience, but I think that there's the Postal Service issue that also has to be resolved, regular plane flights. There's the issue that the United States would like to see more telecommunications between the United States and Cuba, larger access to the Internet. The Cubans want to move more slowly on that. So there are differences, but where if there's a will, there's a way. and it appears that both sides do want to move towards at least normal diplomatic relations and see if that starts to move us towards actual normal relations.
Peter Kornbluh joining us from New York. Thanks so much.